The Rise of New Religions, Nietzsche, Wilber, and Meme Theory. Written by Andrea Diem-Lane. Narrated by Francie Wick. From Old to New, a personal account. When you think of a cult, otherwise known as a new religion, you might envision its members as hippies, or self-proclaimed psychics, or someone with a unique nature. But very often, this is far from the truth. I was raised in a somewhat typical Catholic family, with 6 siblings, in the suburbs of Los Angeles. And somehow, despite my parochial education, preppy topsider shoes, and pastel-colored polo shirts worn with the collars up. Remember, I'm referring to the early 80s when this was cool. I found myself highly attracted to a new and foreign religion. In this personal narrative, the 3 major stages of my religious life, from a devout Catholic with childhood aspirations for sisterhood, to a follower of an Indian guru, and finally to an agnostic, can illustrate how an average American becomes drawn to an alternative group and how and why one may depart from it. To begin with, my Catholic initiation transpired in a hospital sink. When my blood cells started battling with each other and the first transfusion did not take, the nurses at Holy Cross Hospital figured they better baptize me. With a sprinkle of tap water on my wrinkled newborn forehead and a hand gesture of a cross made over my faint brow, a few religious words were pronounced. I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Voila! I was viewed as saved, not to be destined for the land of limbo, a neither here nor there spiritual region supposedly designed primarily for non-baptized children. According to Catholic dogma, my name would now appear as one of the chosen in St. Peter's directory. As for my Catholic upbringing, it included the usual: attending Catholic school for 12 years, receiving the sacraments of penance, communion, and confirmation, and going to church every Sunday. Being a very religious kid, I would even try to squeeze in a few extra masses during the week, just before school started. Although I must admit it was often tough sacrificing handball for our fathers. However, my religious heritage faced competition early on in my childhood. When I was in 2nd grade, at around the time of my first Holy Communion, my sister returned from India. I was a bit too young to understand what a guru meant, but I had heard my mother tearfully explain to relatives that she went to live at the ashram of her guru as the reason for the journey. My mother displayed her dislike of an idea by over-expressing the word in question. As might be expected, my sister was from the hippie generation, a flower child as it were, who experimented in mind-expanding drugs before coming to Eastern philosophy. In her room, amidst the beaded curtains and other funky 60s decor, were pictures of a bearded Indian man wearing a turban. Just a kid at the time, it was the Indian candies on her nightstand, supposedly personally blessed by the guru himself, and referred to as prasad, that always caught my attention. These candies looked like multicolored miniature Good and Plenty, and had a similar taste. My sister did not mind me eating them, since, because they were blessed, she believed, as other initiates did, that they possessed a spiritual benefit to the recipient. So the more her little sister ate, the more enlightened she might become. Now, this may sound ridiculous from a Western standpoint. How could candies blessed by an Indian man be holy? But if looked at more objectively, there is really not that much difference between the concept of prasad and the blessed bread I was soon to receive during the sacrament of communion. Granted, the Catholic looks upon the bread as the embodiment of Jesus via transubstantiation. Certainly philosophically a much more radical notion than my sister's tradition was proposing. Yet, both food items are given a sacred status, and when ingested, one believes that one somehow partakes in the divine. Well, while I in no way attribute the Prasad encounter as responsible, in my mid-teen years I was pulled to the ideas of Indian philosophy. And ironically, it was in my Catholic high school that I had my first major dose of Eastern philosophy as a young adult. Although Father Butkus, a name I will never forget, taught more traditional Catholic ideas in my sophomore year religion class, both my junior and senior religion teachers, who happened to be in their mid-20s and who were not priests, had their own interests in Eastern teachings and often spoke of Indian gurus and read from Indian scriptures. When yoga and meditation were occasionally proposed for the class session, students would let out a joyful yelp, anything to get out of real work. I suppose this was a more liberal Catholic high school than most. Anyway, as typical of many 16-year-old minds, I was seeking answers to deep philosophical questions, and somehow I found the Eastern approach quite appealing. Instead of an eternal hell, reincarnation was posited. Instead of one true path, all religions were in some degree valued. Unlike in Christianity, where a Tibetan Buddhist child would be condemned to infinite damnation after death for not being Christian, to me a very unfair scenario, especially since it is not his or her fault for never even hearing about Christianity in his or her part of the world. In the Eastern perspective, everyone, including lower life forms, was destined at some point for liberation. Moreover, according to Indian thought, God did not walk on the planet only once 2,000 years ago, but was believed to manifest in human form throughout the ages, including my own. While the religious iconography was foreign to me, I found it exotic and enticing. To my parents' demise, my Catholic ideology was beginning to wane. My mother suspected my philosophical conversion when I announced my commitment to vegetarianism. It is common in Eastern traditions not to eat meat. If truth be told, at first I tried to hide it from her, fearing her wrathful reaction. But when she found a handful of chicken pieces crunched up in a napkin under the kitchen table, I was clearly busted. She reacted like she had uncovered a load of marijuana in my dresser drawer. All hell broke loose. Why the overreaction from a mother who already went through this with an elder daughter? She must have figured that she lost one of her children's souls to the devil. From her perspective, this was clearly a sign her mothering skills were suspect. But to lose 2 children, especially her youngest, was unthinkable. My sister was also freaked out over the whole affair. She feared she would be blamed for my newfound interest, and tried to talk me into eating meat until I turned 18 or something, or at least until Mom calmed down. But the thought was inconceivable to me. Sure, I would conceal religious paraphernalia, read philosophical books elsewhere, and meditate behind locked doors, but I would not be told what to eat. I was asserting my independence and individuality, what many psychologists call a healthy transition at my age. No doubt I was watched closely from then on. Around this time, I had my first out-of-body experience, but not while meditating. It happened spontaneously while lying down in bed. I felt an overpowering force come through me, like a strong wind, and pull, almost a vacuum-sucking sensation. What I felt was my spirit out of my body. I ascended in rapid speed to what appeared to be higher and more conscious states of awareness. Another one occurred shortly after this, but this time from the dream state. I had a vivid dream that I died, being hit by a huge truck, and suddenly, with the awareness that I died, I was thrown into what seemed like a classic near-death experience. The old claim that you cannot dream your own death should certainly be reevaluated. These intense experiences drew me even more into mysticism and Eastern philosophy. Reading Autobiography of a Yogi and other popular Indian texts instilled within me a desire to be a female yogi of sorts. I would try to meditate a couple of hours a day and live a life of ahimsa, nonviolence. My college roommate must have thought I was a bit nuts when I would retire to the walk-in closet for an hour or two to meditate. I preferred a dark location for this activity. Unfortunately, this act almost got me killed when one time my roommate, not knowing I was home, heard a noise in the closet and plunged into it with a knife ready to stab. I guess I should have put a note on the closed door reading, "Do not disturb. Meditation in progress." All of these philosophical pursuits culminated when I received initiation into an Indian religious organization. Like my sister, I now had a guru, in fact, the very same one. I first wrote to him in India when I was 16, just after my out-of-body experiences. Having detailed my mystical travel, I expressed a yearning for spiritual liberation, withdrawing from the wheel of reincarnation, and some kind of guidance to that accord. My keen desire for initiation was declared by the guru as altogether good. But, as with all initiates, I had to wait until my adult years, 20s, to be ceremonially welcomed into the spiritual brotherhood. Why the delay? The guru thought that pursuit of initiation should be a mature individual's choice, and not a parent's enforcement. When I turned 20, I applied for membership, under the assumption that I was a vegetarian, did not take drugs or alcohol, and lived a moral life, including no premarital sex, and was accepted. I found it a bit ironic, however, when the initiation ceremony of all places in California took place a few blocks from my parents' abode. Traveling over 2 hours from my college town, I ended up next to Mom and Dad's house to be spiritually connected to an Indian mystic. I borrowed a friend's car so as not to be recognized and wore sunglasses when traversing the streets. My ruse proved successful, and I was now officially a disciple of a guru. The ceremony itself was quite interesting. The inner spiritual regions were more fully explained. The proper technique to meditate was highlighted, and most importantly, a meditation mantra was given. Several initiates shed tears of joy, perhaps out of love for the guru or because they believed, as they were told, that enlightenment was theirs within at least 4 lifetimes, depending on one's karma and effort. During the initiation, the one major spiritual experience I had was when the representative of the guru, the initiator, shook my hand, welcoming me into the spiritual family, and his face took on the appearance of the guru himself. The representative's eyes and facial structures seemed to melt into another image, and I was enthralled by it. Other than that, at the time, I did not have an instant out-of-body experience as I had hoped for, or anything comparable. When I graduated from college, I planned my first trip to see the guru in India. Certainly, telling my parents I was heading off to a third-world country on the other side of the planet to receive darshan of that guru was not an option for me. Planning the journey to my initiation in my old hometown now seemed like a piece of cake. Pulling off this journey required real ingenuity. Cleverly, I thought of sandwiching the India trip in between a trip to Europe, so that the few weeks before and after India were spent riding the trains of the European continent. This I did with my girlfriend. She did not accompany me to the ashram in India, however. I had to do that alone. When I tried to exit the plane in the middle of the night in Saudi Arabia, in no less than short sleeves, thinking we had already landed in India, I kind of wished she was there to give me much-needed direction. I was a bit of a basket case at this time. There was so much going on in my head. Flying over to India by myself, knowing that the plane landed at 3 a.m. in such a foreign environment, dreading being found out by my parents, and meeting someone I viewed literally as a living Jesus figure. The ashram itself was centered in Delhi and quite impressive. Lodging and food were free, and the people were exceptionally nice. My room was a dorm setting with over 20 beds in it. Once I caught up on some sleep and set up shop in the room, I heard rumors that the guru was soon to appear at the ashram. That night, I had my first view of him. The sight of the guru brought me to my knees. He was regal and radiant, soft and yet powerful. In his discourses, he displayed great wisdom and insight. What most won my admiration was a certain lack of ego. He did not seem to possess vanity of any kind. The one opportunity to speak with him occurred in front of over 10,000 Indians. I was granted a few minutes to approach his chair on the dais and to ask him a question, a sort of an interview. When his response indicated that he did not know that I was initiated yet, foreknowledge I assumed he possessed, I was a bit thrown off. But that was not really my focus as I departed his company. I was just blown away by his overall presence. I stumbled down the stairs from where he was sitting, and appearing overwhelmed, was handed a cup of water by an Indian woman. I guess that I was so out of it by the emotion of it all, I just sat and drank the water. Once I realized that I had drank it, I was in a state of panic, for India's water usually contains strange parasites that, if not used to, lead to amoebic dysentery. Foreigners are strongly advised to drink and brush their teeth with only bottled water. For days I waited for the gurgling stomach to set in, but thankfully no problems developed. After a month here, I returned to Europe safely, with plans to come back to India within a few years. My second trip was to the Punjab in northern India to visit the guru in the main ashram. It was closed to all Westerners on the earlier visit due to sporadic terrorist activities between the Sikhs and the Hindus. This time I went with my sister. After an 8-hour train ride from Delhi, dodging baseball-sized cockroaches in our very questionable compartment, we arrived at the ashram gates to find a Shangri-La-type town. The people there felt they were walking amongst God, and thus a feeling of love and devotion radiated throughout. As policy demands, food and lodgings were again complimentary. For 2 weeks I meditated, attended the guru's discourses in the mornings and evenings for about an hour each, and relaxed on the grass lawns in the sun the rest of the time with fellow members. Again, I sandwiched India between a European vacation, and so my parents, at least this is how I justified, were spared heartache and worries. The academic study of new religions. What is a cult? Despite the negative image displayed in the media as a brainwashing, blood-drinking, money-mongering group, a cult is defined benignly in religious studies as simply a new religious movement. Since the term cult has such pejorative connotations in the public's mind, some scholars consciously shy away from using the term cult in their writings, opting instead for the more neutral term new religion. While synonymous words, somehow new religion or alternative religion is more palatable than cult, bringing to mind touchy-feely Shirley MacLaine-type groups and not suicidal Jim Jones ones. While some cults may be harmful or problematic, one has to only think of the Japanese Om group, which released sarin nerve gas on Japanese subways in hope to initiate the New Age. Certainly, not all are. Thus, using the term cult to imply a deviant religious aberration is altogether a misnomer. When my students learned what the term cult really means, the common reaction is at first one of surprise, and then a sort of empowerment with the realization that they know something that the so-called public does not. Now, they can snicker at news anchors as uninformed when they report on cults in such a demonic light. The horrible depiction of a cult most likely represents society's bias against new or different ideas. But it is important to remember that all religions at some time began as a cult, unless they started as a break-off group, otherwise known as a sect from a parent religion. Even Christianity, the largest religion on earth, and certainly the dominant religion in the Western world, began 2,000 years ago as a cult. And when Christianity enters foreign soil, such as India, it is again of cult status for that particular society. In its initial stages, a cult generally is at odds with the mainstream ideas of society, offering a radical shift from cultural trends, and hence it may experience a poor reception. Labeled as weird and sometimes eccentric, cult members often face ridicule and discrimination. Yet, as a cult grows in size and gains acceptance, it seems to shed its cult title and is welcomed into the social arena. This occurs as the cult accommodates, ever so slightly, its philosophy and perhaps activities to fit more succinctly with social norms. The contentious history of Mormonism is a classic case in point of how a one-time cult evolves to gain acceptance. The first generation is usually the most radical, and with each generation, the faith alters more and more to fit the times. If the group remains in contradiction to such normative values, it will find it more difficult to survive. All too often, new religious movements spring up and die out, even before being documented by religious scholars. As with any new organization, success depends upon the group's ability to appeal to a larger audience. Sticking to non-flexible rules and ideology may limit its attraction. To illustrate how accommodation occurs, let us take a look at Buddhism's entry into China. Instead of maintaining the atheistic philosophy espoused by Buddha, Buddhism took on Chinese mythology, as Chinese gods were understood as celestial forms of the Buddha. Thus, those Chinese interested in Buddhist philosophy need not abandon their religious heritage, as the Buddhist cult in China was now part of the mainstream. When a new religious movement loses its status as new, it is thus viewed as an established religion. Break-off groups or sects may develop in reaction to the liberalization of the group, with the goal to return to a time of religious purity. The dynamic nature of religion becomes apparent. New religious movements pop up, accommodation occurs, sects develop in reaction, and the whole process reinvigorates the religious scene once again. A brief history of cults. Many cults today are described as old shamanism in modern dress. In other words, new religions are really not that new at all, but a reworking of classic religious ideas popular throughout history. The reference to the shaman works since, like shamanism, new religions generally have an interest in healing, in charging the world with wonder, and in a paradise time. Simply think of the New Age movement, with its spirit and sometimes dolphin channelers, astrologers, healers, and the apocalyptic age on its way. But unlike shamans who seem to fit as a part of culture, cults are often placed outside of the mainstream. To illustrate the popularity of cult-type ideas in history, let us examine a few examples. In the Hellenistic times, there was an interest in meditation, Platonic wonder, and exemplary figures such as Pythagoras. Throughout the Middle Ages, Jewish Kabbalah was established, and there was an interest in alchemy and magic. In the Renaissance period, the popular micro-macro concept was espoused by Paracelsus and Pico. In the 18th century was a time of Freemasonry, which combined rational science, Rosicrucian occultism, and biblical literalism. Swedenborgianism, which spoke of a monistic God, the second coming of Jesus in the New Age and mystical travels. Saint Germain of the I Am movement, and Mesmerism. In the 19th century, idealism, the mind is all, was predominant, and certainly Emerson fits here. This period was most known for spiritualism, theosophy, New Thought, and Christian Science. Eastern religions were also making their way to America at this time. And finally, in the 20th century, we find a proliferation of new religious traditions, from New Age-type groups to new Hindu guru movements to new Christian religions, to religions that offer an interesting mix of many religious ideas. Today, there is no stopping the onslaught of new religions as ideas circulate around the globe with the help of computers and modern travel. Cults numbers in America. In The Cult Experience, J. Gordon Melton, a leading expert on cults, argues that there are approximately 900 different mainline denominations in the West, namely of Christian origin, and approximately 600 alternative religions or cults here. These include theosophical spiritualist groups, Latter-day Saints, ancient wisdom schools, magical occult groups, Middle Eastern religious organizations, and Eastern religions, such as the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON. Altogether, there are about 300,000 members in new religious movements in America. Melton points out that while the membership numbers are small, the significance of them is not to be underplayed. The impact of new religions on the religious milieu in America, especially the influence of Eastern religions, indeed will continue to be noticeable. Members who join cults. The members who join these groups do not necessarily have a greater risk of personal crises than non-members. In fact, many are educated, middle to upper-class urbanites who, argues Melton, may be seeking to assert adulthood, to experience group fellowship, to reinvigorate a sense of self, to re-mythologize their worldview, and to enliven spiritual intensity. Many Americans are attracted to Eastern religions since these traditions tend to be non-dogmatic, emphasize individual spiritual development, abandon dualism, see all religions as a valid path, etc. Most learn of new religions on university campuses as literature is passed out and recruiting events scheduled. About 10% join an alternative religion after a recruiting event, and those that do join stay on average 2 years or less. Most return to the religion they were raised in. Interestingly, there are a predominant number of Jews and Catholics who join a non-conventional religion. Since many Jews are raised in a secular environment, an alternative religion may actually fill some void, personal or religious, in their life. As for the attraction for Catholics, perhaps, and this is purely speculative, the rigid ceremonial ritual of the Mass and the sinful view of the self are equally replaced with a more exciting participatory group interaction and a philosophy that promotes a greater sense of self-worth and empowerment. The claim that members are coerced or that they are subject to a pathological state is indeed unfounded. Hostile reports of cult activities generally come from parents or disillusioned ex-cult members whose anti-cult agenda is apparent. Borrowing from Victor Turner, who argues that the 3 stages of the rites of passage are a separation, a liminal experience devoid of structure and hierarchy, and an aggregation and renewal, the cult life, claims Melton, is for many a liminal encounter. Members are given an opportunity to express their independence and to develop a new sense of self-importance, and thus the brainwashing model does not seem to accurately explain why people join cults. With respect to pathology, there seems to be just as many cases of it in mainline religions as there are in alternative religions. Melton, who appears to be quite sympathetic to cults, goes as far as to claim that for young members who wish to break from a strong authoritarian family, joining a cult, instead of turning to drugs, prostitution, or whatever promotes an assertion of adulthood, actually may be a sensible tactic. How to discriminate among new religions. Whether Melton is too soft in his attitude towards cults is certainly worth considering. In Spiritual Choices, Dick Anthony and Thomas Robbins make the argument that one needs to discriminate among new religions, whether they are problematic or non-problematic groups. By problematic, Anthony and Robbins mean organizations that tend to promote in-out group attitudes, to rely on charismatic leaders with potentially manipulative control over the disciples, to interpret religious text literally, to collapse the distinction between the mundane and the transcendent, and sometimes to incite millenarian ideas. With these traits, greater discrimination is warranted. Anthony and Robbins placed Jones' People's Temple, Scientology, Rajneesh's group, and the Unification Church, to name a few, in the questionable category. Similarly, in an article in Understanding Cults and Spiritual Movements, David Lane makes the case that there are several signs of a potentially harmful religious group. The group charges a mandatory fee. Membership in the group negatively affects relations with family and friends. The group leader promotes ethical standards which he or she may himself or herself not live up to. The actual history of the group is falsely documented or fabricated, and the philosophy fits pre-rational and not rational or trans-rational standards. In other words, critical thinking and doubting are not allowed. If the movement possesses any or all of these, Lane's warning is to be wary. According to Anthony and Robbins, non-problematic groups, on the other hand, tend to rely more on spiritual technique than a leader's personality, to be non-literalistic, to acknowledge spiritual growth as a lengthy process with multiple levels to it, and to shy away from millenarian concepts and in-out group arrogance. Altogether, a legitimate group gives meaning, social stability, coherence, a workable worldview, and promotes higher spiritual or self-development. How to professionally study cults. In religious studies, the overall accepted approach to study religion is phenomenology, objectively studying religious phenomena and refraining from making value judgments on what is ontologically true. Utilizing the methods of epoche, bracketing out one's prejudices, and Verstehen, empathy, phenomenology allows outsiders an inside glimpse of the inner workings and logic behind a religious faith. This approach allows an air of openness between scholar and devotee, and greater insight into the religion in question. Yet, when critically analyzing the data, the reductive approach, grounding religion in material culture, can also play a valuable role. Instead of proposing a theological explanation for religious data, the sociologist of religion places it within a material context, although not necessarily reducing the data to simply materialistic underpinnings. It is both its objectivity and its utilization of Occam's razor that essentially classifies sociology of religion as a scientific endeavor. However, many scholars of religion argue that in addition to phenomenology and sociology of religion, we need to develop new approaches to study alternative religions. Instead of focusing on the short histories of the movement in its immediate institutional form, the synchronic model, Robert Elwood suggests that we emphasize the philosophical continuities in new religions and the historical linkages with other religions, the diachronic approach. In fact, Elwood contends that we call new religions emergent religions instead, since, while they appear new and sudden in reality, they are filled with common symbols and often have direct historical connections. Thus, the bottom line here is that scholars need to examine the influencing factors that led to the new religion, only to discover that the religion may not be that new to begin with. When collecting data on the new religion, it is important, contends Donald Stone, to try to make our bias very explicit. The Enlightenment method of objectivity and detachment is highly suspect, since when evaluating new religions, personal preferences and value assumptions often enter into the study. Suggestions to study new religions include collaborative research and revealing and curbing bias by keeping an introspection journal. Also, one should ask the respondent after having read the study to make comments to increase confidence in the work. The reactions could then be printed in an appendix. Covert research sets up the wrong dynamic. Yet, while cognitive openness is important, one must be careful not to engage in uncritical experiential participation. In other words, going native. Walter Capps makes an interesting argument that the academic study of religion contributes to the rise of new religions. The way the scholar puts material together has a huge impact encouraging particular patterns and formations. Religious studies, then, is a creative and constructive discipline, influencing the very subject being studied. For instance, in my PhD dissertation, I documented several new religions that had not yet been noticed by the academic community. Yet, somehow by cataloging them, they earned a degree, however small, of recognition and of legitimacy. Thus, in many ways, scholars can unintentionally contribute to the success, or perhaps downfall, of a group by writing about them. Since many new religions are relatively obscure movements unheard of by the larger public, any outside recognition not only gives them a certain publicity they would not otherwise have, but it also may lend a credibility to their claims because now the group's name and ideas are officially documented. Simply by being acknowledged and recorded by scholars as a religious group in the spiritual marketplace in America may be the first step out of the classification of unheard of or totally obscure. Indeed, scholars are not objective observers, but play an interactive role whenever they investigate a guru or a group. Thus, since their research can alter the future history of the movement, scholars must take seriously the powerful role they play. Having understood what a cult is, who are its most likely candidates, and how to properly evaluate alternative groups, let us turn in the next section to my favorite philosopher, Nietzsche, to comprehend how new religions manifest in the first place. Your God is dead, but mine still lives. In the latter part of the 19th century, when Nietzsche proclaimed that God is dead, he believed that future generations would suffer immeasurably from God's premature funeral. Why? Because without such a God, without such an ultimate meaning or concern, humans would have to stare reality in the face and discover that there was no purpose ultimately in human existence. Humans are the expendable result of blind evolutionary processes, and, as such, have no ontological status in the grand scheme of things. As Nietzsche argued, without God we are left with nihilism, which is another way of saying that without ultimate meaning we are left with no meaning at all. Hence, when humans kill their belief in God, they must then turn to their own inner selves, and in doing so, discover that there is no truly objective truth by which to govern their lives. We become wanderers, a lost species. Yet, though Nietzsche was prophetic for his time, God has died more or less in the secular world, he did not realize how resilient a belief in God would be. Nietzsche on the death of God. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how could we have done this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving now? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night and more night coming on all the time? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the gravediggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything yet of God's decomposition? Gods too decompose. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we, the murderers of all murderers, console ourselves? That which was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet possessed has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? With what water could we be purified? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we need to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods, simply to seem worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever shall be born after us, for the sake of this deed, he shall be part of a higher history than all history hitherto. Yes, the God of the medieval times died. We now live in a hyper-scientific age, and it is difficult for us to believe, as their ancestors before us did. But as Mircea Eliade so rightly pointed out, religious feeling, the sense of the numinous, is not a stage in human development, but an integral element of one's very psychophysical makeup. Even if we kill one god, another will rise up to replace him or her. We are religious beings to the core, even in our strident atheism. Nietzsche on the religiosity of the human spirit. How strong the metaphysical need is, and how hard nature makes it to bid it a final farewell. If he becomes aware of being in this condition, he feels a profound stab in the heart and signs for the man who will lead him back to his lost love, whether she be called religion or metaphysics. It is in such moments that his intellectual probity is put to the test. Hence, Nietzsche's prophecy is not about killing our spiritual sensibilities. Those are forever with us, barring some future DNA tinkering, but rather about the decay of a certain cultural icon, the uplifted totem of our Western society. And, according to Nietzsche, we as a society were not ready for it. We were pretending to be adult and mature scientists, when in point of fact, we were merely schoolchildren playing too early with our chemistry sets. We were not ready for the explosion. We were not ready for the Nietzschean existential hammer. We were not ready, in sum, to kill meaning and face the consequences. Nietzsche on nihilism. Nihilism represents a pathological transitional stage. What is pathological is the tremendous generalization, the inference that there is no meaning at all, that there is no truth, that there is no absolute nature of things. The most extreme form of nihilism would be the view that every belief, every considering something true, is necessarily false, because there is simply no true world. But ironically, Nietzsche was wrong about God's death. Indeed, we killed a certain form of God, the mythic and naive belief we carried over from primitive times, but we did not, perhaps cannot, kill God. God resurrects. God does not die, per se, but only certain versions of him, her, it, do. Nietzsche on science and metaphysics. Rigorous science is, in fact, able to detach us from this ideational world, metaphysical, only to a slight extent. But it can gradually and step by step illuminate the history of this world as idea arose, and raise us above the whole, think at least for moments at a time. Perhaps we then recognize that the thing in itself, the originator of the world, is worthy of Homeric laughter. It appeared to be so much, indeed everything, and is actually empty, that is to say, empty of meaning. Thus, the history of religion is not about God's fast retreat from the day-to-day affairs of the world in the wake of humans' continual progress, but rather about how varying versions of God arise and decay over time. Likewise, religion does not die out when humans progress scientifically. Instead, it modifies itself to the new cultural milieu. Why? Because religion is not an outside force penetrating into the heart of humans, but instead, part and parcel of the neurological history of humans, and thus is intimately connected with one's own psychological projections. So, to destroy religion, we would have to destroy who we are. Therefore, God persists, in various manifestations, and religion persists, despite persecutions to the contrary, since they arise, according to Dennett, Dawkins, Blackmore, Crick, and others, from a biological heritage. The real question, then, is not about why humans are religious, but how human spiritual yearning projects differently over historical time and geographical space. A classic example to illustrate the resilience of religion and its evolutionary nature occurred in the Catholic Church. In the 15th century, most of the Roman Catholic Church still believed that the sun revolved around the earth. Those who thought otherwise were severely reprimanded, or put in jail, or tortured, or worse yet, executed. At this time, devout Christians felt that their sacred book, the Bible, indicated that the earth was the center of the universe. If astronomers like Galileo and Copernicus showed evidence to the contrary, it would mean that the Bible was wrong. And if the Bible was wrong, it would mean that God was wrong. And if God was wrong, well, he was no longer God. Such a thought was impossible in light of the Church's stringent orthodoxy. Hence, to question the Bible's astronomical version of cosmology was akin to questioning God's supreme authority and knowledge. It is little wonder, therefore, that the scientist Bruno burned at the stake. Better for a false believer to die than to have millions of faithful have their belief in God shattered. 5 centuries later, however, Pope John Paul II essentially apologized for the Church's blunder and its maltreatment of intellectual pioneers. The same Pope, by the way, acknowledged the irrefutable evidence of evolution. Nietzsche on the failure of progress. Let us not be deceived. Time marches forward. We'd like to believe that everything that is in it also marches forward, that the development is one that moves forward. The most level-headed are led astray by this illusion. But the 19th century does not represent progress over the 16th, and the German spirit of 1888 represents a regress from the German spirit of 1788. Mankind does not advance. It does not even exist. The overall aspect is that of a tremendous experimental laboratory in which a few successes are scored, scattered throughout all ages, while there are untold failures, and all order, logic, union, and obligingness are lacking. How can we fail to recognize that the ascent of Christianity is a movement of decadence, that the German Reformation is a recrudescence of Christian barbarism, that the Revolution, French, destroyed the instinct for a grand organization of society? Man represents no progress over the animal. Yet, even though Copernicus and Galileo eventually won, and even though the Roman Catholic Church conceded to science that the world does indeed revolve around the sun, the belief in the Catholic God did not diminish considerably. Why not? Because the Church eventually adapted its version of God to harmonize with science's latest discoveries. In more precise terminology, the Catholic Church's idea of God evolved. And it evolved precisely because it was confronted with a new environment, opened up by the telescope and new mathematical predictions, that would cause its extinction if it did not, or would not, change. The telescope, the extension of the empirical eye, was too convincing to ignore. Thus, if Catholicism dismissed the findings of astronomers, which it first tried to do, it would also have to disenfranchise a growing segment of its membership. Despite the fact that the Catholic Church allowed its concept of God to slowly evolve, it nevertheless disconnected itself from growing schisms in its ranks, both from the liberal and conservative wings. Where did such members now turn, if not towards the Catholic Church? New religions. Even if those new religions were merely genealogical extensions or offshoots from more mainstream faiths. Hence, it is not surprising to see the Protestant movement turning liberal and conservative. Liberal in the direction of science and its deists, and conservative in the direction of biblical fundamentalism and its unimpeachable authority. Both responses led to new movements, new faiths, new interpretations. Hence, God's evolution is the impetus behind the evolution of new religions, which attempt to cope with any church's attempt to integrate or denigrate its faith with humankind's new or old discoveries of the world around them. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said that we have killed God, the Judaic Christian version, prematurely in the latter part of the 19th century. At God's funeral, there will be a banquet where other vying gods will compete for the newly widowed followers. But Nietzsche felt that only the god of nihilism would be the winner. How could humans muster up the strength or the naivete to believe in anything else? Yet, Nietzsche was only partially correct. Nihilism vis-a-vis existentialism vis-a-vis postmodernism certainly does have its assemblage, since even dead gods can resurrect in newly disguised forms, some of which are better adapted to the mode of the time. Nietzsche on the difficulty of giving up the notion of God and meaning. The nihilistic question, for what, is rooted in the old habit of supposing that the goal must be put up, given, demanded from outside, by some superhuman authority. Having unlearned faith in that, one still follows the old habit and seeks another authority that can speak unconditionally and command goals and tasks. The authority of conscience now steps up front. The more emancipated one is from theology, the more imperativistic morality becomes, to compensate for the loss of a personal authority, or the authority of reason, or the social instinct, the herd, or history with an immanent spirit and a goal within, so one can entrust oneself to it. One wants to rid oneself of the responsibility. One would accept fatalism. Thus, cultural decay leads to new cults. Look at the etymology of the word culture. Its root is cultus. Culture is another way of saying established cult, or an established way of thinking, living, and being. Anytime a culture is severely questioned, usually epitomized by a questioning of its most cherished gods or values by a significant portion of its population, it leads to new cults of thought. Culture does not so much disappear as change. Religions do not so much decay as much as evolve. God's decay, then, does not lead to his or her demise, but to the opposite, his or her resurrection in a new version or form. Nietzsche realized that Europe's God was on its death march, and in its steps, a much more terrifying God would emerge, that of nihilism. No meaning, no purpose. Such a God did arise and walk, but so did countless others which contravened existentialism. Such cults are society's responses to change. The death of one religion leads to the birth of a new one, even if that offspring arises within the midst of its parent. From Judaism, we get Catholicism. From Catholicism, we get Lutheranism. From Hinduism, we get Buddhism. From Buddhism, we get Zen. From Sant Mat, we get Radhaswami. From Radhaswami, we get Eckankar, and so on. Each emerging, then denying, then branching separately away from the parental offspring. The God of an earth-centered cosmology dies only to reappear as a bigger God of a sun-centered cosmology, only to die again and re-emerge as the progenitor of the Big Bang and multiple universes. God's adaptations are innumerable, because humans' desire for ultimate meaning is, given the present state, insatiable. But why do some religions become more popular than others? Why do some new cults fulfill the needs of a larger segment of the population, where other religions struggle and die out? To answer that question in the next chapter, we need to turn from Nietzsche, who explained to us why and how gods and religions decay and arise, to the mimetic theory of cultural evolution, particularly as Susan Blackmore presents it. Mimetic theory and new religions. Susan Blackmore's mimetic theory of cultural evolution is a simple one on the surface. Essentially, it goes like this. Just as genes survive by differentially replicating themselves in a sea of competition, with the stronger, best adapted ones surviving by being able to co-opt the environment and pass on able-bodied replications. So too with human ideas. Ideas, or memes, survive by making copies of themselves in host environments, usually human brains. The problem is that there are fewer hosts than ideas. Indeed, there are innumerable ideas, but limited hosts. Hence, the competition of the fittest. In this context, where ideas cannot survive unless they find a host environment, we know there will be winners and losers. Winner ideas are not necessarily the best or the truest thoughts, but rather those that can survive and make replicated copies of themselves, which in turn generate more duplications. Not everything, such as perceptual experience or classical and operant conditioned responses, is a meme, but only those ideas that can be passed on by imitation. Besides concepts, examples include clothing fashions and catchy phrases. For instance, when I was a kid, a common saying was, "Go for it," sometimes abbreviated GFI. Why this phrase was so popular is fairly easy to explain by mimetics. Children tend to imitate behavior in order to better fit in with their social group. Using phrases such as "go for it," "that's cool," "right on," etc., are verbal ways of expressing consolidation with one's peers. The verbal meme I take responsibility for, at least in my family and among my friends, was the phrase nectar. The nectar serve, the nectar meal, the nectar house, the nectar guy. My sister and best friend started saying it as much as I used to. While I have outgrown it by now, new meme phrases have crept in to take its place. I think I will spare you these. Fashions offer an interesting example of memes. We see fall fashions in Nordstrom's magazine, and we tend to imitate them. One year it is long skirts, and the next short. As a child, I wore flaring bell-bottoms. Dittos were the cool thing. Then, as a teenager following the latest trend, I wore skin-tight pants, sometimes having to use pliers to get the zipper up. And now, I think flare is in again. Or am I a year behind? Trendy ideas change, and behavior follows suit. Among surfers, I remember when shortboard surfing was a big rush. But today, longboard surfing has regained popularity. Blackmore on memes as imitation. When you imitate someone else, something is passed on. This something can then be passed on again and again, and so take on a life of its own. We might call this thing an idea, an instruction, a behavior, a piece of information. But if we are going to study it, we shall need to give it a name. Fortunately, there is a name. It is a meme. Since memes require imitations, they must be passed on, or replicated to survive. To be sure, there may be many things that we might imitate in isolation, but in order for a meme to be successful, it must be able to be imitated and distributed among a larger group of people. In a way, memes are akin to contagious viruses waiting to infect unsuspecting hosts. Have you ever noticed how you cannot stop your mind from thinking about certain thoughts? We are forever bombarded with words, thoughts, ideas, and phrases, even if we wish to not dwell on them. Successful memes must be self-replicating. They seem to shout, as Blackmore points out, "Copy me." If a meme could get itself successfully copied, it will. One way to do so is to command the resources of someone's brain and make them keep on rehearsing it, so giving the meme a competitive edge over memes that do not get rehearsed. Memes like this are not only more likely to be remembered, but also to be on your mind when you next speak to someone else. If we take stories as an example, a story that has great emotion and impact, or for any other reason has the effect that you just cannot stop thinking about it, will go round and round in your head. This will consolidate the memory for that story, and will also mean that, since you are thinking about it a lot, you are more likely to pass it on to someone else, who may be similarly affected. Blackmore's theory, borrowed from Richard Dawkins, who first articulated it in his book, The Selfish Gene, posits a radical view of human culture. Ideas are living us, not vice versa. Indeed, the very I, the heart of consciousness, the personality, is itself the result of mimetic warfare. Whoever we are is the outcome of which memes successfully reproduce. We are not a single entity, but rather a memeplex, a network of connected and sometimes disconnected idea units. Thus, the concept of a self vanishes. Rather, we are walking meme machines, the title of Blackmore's latest book. Mimetic theory implies that there are certain rules that we should be able to discover, which govern idea replication. The most obvious and simple one is that a popular meme will not consistently be in radical opposition to the reproduction of genes, although it is important to note that certain popular memes, like the phrase legitimate, are of neutral genetic value. For example, the idea of celibacy may be a helpful one for certain individuals, but by its very intent cannot, unless systematically violated, be a popular one amongst the majority of humans. Why it cannot is perhaps too apparent to spell out. If celibacy were strictly adopted by a large segment of the population, it would mean the very extinction of those people and the very death of the idea of celibacy. If everyone practices celibacy, there will eventually not only be no people, but no ideas pertaining to sexual abstention. The logic at first seems so simple as to be ridiculous, but on closer inspection, it is an extremely powerful tool in order to understand why underlying rules shape mimetic evolution. Quite clearly, ideas that tap into the emotions have a better chance of spreading, even if they are totally bogus. Take chain letters as illustrative case in point. What makes chain letters move? Or, more accurately, what prompts us to pass on a letter to another person, even when we know that its contents may be erroneous? A number of factors, but two are primary: desire and fear, or as Freud would have it, eros and thanatos. Desire is in the form of, hey, if you send this letter along, you will receive lots of money in the mail. Fear is in the form of, hey, if you don't send this letter along, you will get in a car accident. In both cases, the chain letter, the memeplex, is appealing to innate human needs and fears. By playing off those, the letter raises the probability of its survival, even though its contents, like we said, may be completely fraudulent. Hence, a chain letter is an information virus of sorts, attempting at each turn to infect its host by penetrating its most vulnerable ports of entry. Certainly, there could be other types of chain letters that don't at all appeal to our baser instincts, but the real question is whether or not they would successfully replicate. For instance, I could imagine a chain letter that says, "Please, pass me along because I ask you to." This form of a memeplex is perhaps more honest than its cousin, "Pass me along or I will kill you," but I don't think it has the same advantages and will most likely be circulated amongst a limited number. Overall, all of this suggests that content is secondary to transmission. How a message is spread is more important than what the message says. Another major factor contributing to the success of a meme is its simplicity. The more complicated the meme, the less popular it probably will be. We need look no further than to advertising to see the truth of this statement. Popular ads and commercials are usually ones with cute, catchy slogans and not long, drawn-out ones. Keep the ideas very simple, and you may have a winner. In the 90s, there was a da 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 commercial used to sell Volkswagen cars. That meme song was with me for days. As all avid television watchers know, some commercials are more popular than others, which is another way of saying some messages get passed along better than others. Simple and catchy messages definitely have a better survival rate. Blackmore on meme advertising. Memes are replicators, and if they can get themselves copied, they will. The imitating machinery of the brain is an excellent environment for copying tunes. So if a tune is memorable enough to get lodged in your brain and then passed on again, then it will. And if it is really memorable, or singable, or playable, it will get into a lot of brains. If it turns out to be just what some TV producer needs to start her latest soap opera, then it will get into even more brains. And every time you start humming it, here is a chance that someone will hear you and you will set them off. Meanwhile, plenty of other tunes are never heard again. The consequence of all this is that the successful ones increase in the meme pool at the expense of others. We all get infected with them. If we apply the deconstructive theories of Nietzsche with the mimetic theories of Blackmore, we may begin to understand how new religions arise and what accounts for their survival and success. The transmission of an idea depends on the availability of subject hosts, and thus cultural breakdown or traditional breakdown will be open season for the emergence of new mimetic religious replacement. We can see this in the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, and in the cultural changes in the United States in the 1960s. Nietzsche's idea of cultural disintegration in light of God's death, God here stands for any ultimate value within in any given culture, points to the need for the general masses to look to new gods, new icons, new ideas, and new religions to fulfill the void. Unless, of course, they turn directly to nihilism, a position that Nietzsche felt was ultimately untenable. What God's death portends is really the death of any universally applicable value that the majority of participants believe in. Such a state can either lead to utter anarchy and chaos, or it can lead to the selection of new gods and new icons. In the case of religion, it often leads to competition of new and varied religions. Here is where Blackmore's mimetic theory comes into play, since it helps explain both how and why some religions become more popular than others. Competition among new religions indicates that there will be ones that are more successful than others, and so we should also be able to make some scientific predictions about which ones will prosper utilizing mimetic theory. Mimetic factors determining popularity appear to revolve around three fundamental principles. 1. Value-related incentives. 2. Mimetic simplicity. And 3. Mimetic distribution. Specifically, we have found out that more successful religions tend to have ideas which incite both desire and fear, usually couched in ultimate terms like heaven and hell, simplified core messages which can be transmitted to large audiences without complexity and attendant difficulties, and messages that encourage the membership to spread the teachings. Thus, we can easily see that the popularity of a religion has absolutely nothing to do with its truth value or its aesthetic strengths. Rather, the popularity of a religion is due to how well its ideas can propagate amongst human hosts. Some ideas, even though true, just don't replicate well, and will, due to that deficiency, die out. Therefore, the real reason some religions garner millions of followers, while others die out, is due to factors having nothing to do with God or truth. In a Darwinian fashion, therefore, the survival of the fittest doesn't translate as biggest, or strongest, or most honest, or truest. It translates as this: whatever ideas can survive a given environment and successfully make copies that, in turn, can do the same, will win out. Those ideas that cannot pass this test, and keep in mind that this test says nothing about truth, will, by the very nature of the game, fail and die out. So, like genes, memes are selfish in the sense of looking out for their own reproductive survival. Religions, old or new, are the direct result of this mimetic competition. Some religions are better suited to propagate through large populations than others, even though these religions themselves may have nothing to do with higher or eternal truths. though undoubtedly they may use the disguise of such claims to pass itself through the culture. Blackmore on the truth trickery. The truth trickery is liberally used. In many religions, God and truth are virtually synonymous. Rejecting the faith means turning away from truth. Converting others means giving them the gift of the true faith. This may seem odd when so many religious claims are clearly false, but there are many reasons why it works. For example, people who have a profound experience in a religious context are inclined to take on the memes of that religion. People who like and admire someone may believe their truth claims without question. If this is the case, and Blackmore's theory is indeed persuasive, it suggests that religions are more akin to chain letters than we might at first suspect. The core features a religion must have in order to achieve successful mimetic duplication or adherence is almost the same as those that allow chain letters to survive: desire and fear. In religion, however, desire can be dressed up in some fancy garb like heaven, nirvana, Sachkhand, happy hunting grounds. The reason astrology has survived for countless centuries has nothing to do with its truth value, very low if any, but with its ability to give meaning and hope to individuals who are in need of finding some point or purpose in their day-to-day lives. Fear, likewise, can take on a much more scary face like hell, damnation, wheel of samsara, Hades, and so on. Couple desire and fear with a meme that says it is your duty to spread the message vigorously, and you have a potential winning religion. In this spiritual lottery, one that is governed by how many tickets can get circulated, popular religions must appeal to fundamental human needs in order to succeed. But more importantly, those appeals don't have to be necessarily true, provided that they appear viable. And given the plasticity of the human imagination, almost anything can appear viable, even if it is the opposite. But the key point in all of this is propagation and successful duplication. Blackmore on fear and desire in religion. The Catholic God is watching at all times and will punish people who disobey his commandments with most terrible punishments. Burning forever in hell, for example. These threats cannot easily be tested because God and hell are invisible, and the fear is inculcated from early childhood. Having raised the fear, Catholicism reduces it again. If you turn to Christ, you will be forgiven. God's love is always available, but at a price, and that price is often overlooked completely because it is paid so willingly. It is the price of investing massive amounts of time, energy, and money in your religion. In other words, working for the memes. This same analysis applies for new religions. New memes that dovetail with basic human needs or desires and fears, value-related incentives, will be more successful than those that do not. The New Age movement is a classic example of a new religious movement that cultivates these human emotions. The new age to come is described in paradise terms: eros, pleasure, desire. But those who do not jump on the bandwagon preparing for its entrance will not witness it, suffering instead a tragic end. Thanatos, death, fear. The tactic of inciting fear is what I call an immune meme, or idea quarantine, or meme inoculation. Religious ideas that draw upon fear, such as the devil will get you, or in some Eastern traditions, call will get you, safeguard the conversion to their own family-oriented memes. By utilizing a pre-existing counter-programming, the virus, as it were, will not let you out of its grip. Blackmore on religious memes. No one designed these great faiths with all their clever tricks. Rather, they evolve gradually by mimetic selection. But nowadays, people deliberately use mimetic tricks to spread religions and make money. Their techniques of mimetic engineering are derived from long experience and research, and are similar to those used in propaganda and marketing. With radio, television, and the internet, their memes can spread far further and faster than ever before. Billy Graham's style of televangelism is a good example. He starts out by evoking fear, reminding people of all the terrible things happening in the world and their own impotence and morality. He presents science as having no answers and as a cause of the world's ills, and then persuades people to surrender to the all-powerful God who is their only hope of salvation. The experience of surrender raises powerful emotions, and people turn to God in huge numbers. As with all successful memes, religious ideas must be relatively simple to be easily spread. Certain religions will never be very popular because they either tend to be too complicated to transmit, without losing the very complexity they wish to retain, or because they generate safeguards against duplication. Judaism has been around much longer than either Christianity or Islam, but it remains a relatively small world religion, with numbers ranging from 14 to 20 million, depending on your census. Why so small? Especially when its core text, the Torah, has millions of copies in circulation. A number of possible answers present themselves, but clearly the intricate laws governing Jewish behavior, including circumcision, is one of them. But even more important than this is the general resistance of Jews to preach their religion to others. Compare a Jewish rabbi, for instance, with a Mormon missionary. How many times has someone from the Jewish faith knocked on your door inviting you to the local temple? But how many times has a Mormon, or for that matter a Jehovah's Witness, made personal inquiries of you and your faith? While Blackmore's theory suggests that a popular religion must be relatively simple at its core, at least in the sense of being accepted or rejected by potential recruits, this doesn't mean that the most popular religions in the world are the stupidest. Her point, rather, is that the essential core doctrine must be simplified to a degree that its essence can be transmitted with the least difficulty. The downside, of course, to an extremely simple memeplex is that its very easiness may not ensure long-term commitments. The more complicated a conversion procedure, the more time and effort it takes, the more likely the neophyte will stay within the group and display adherence. Some religions have small followings but quite devoted members. Thus, even though Catholicism may have a fairly complex theology, one need only think of Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, its essential message necessary for conversion must be kept at a bare minimum. The Apostles' Creed offers a simple memeplex. Otherwise, with too complex theology, potential recruits would be warded off. Now, on some level, this has already happened, since Catholicism is a much more complicated memeplex than fundamentalist biblical Christianity. Remember that many Catholics today are not converts, but recipients of a birth heritage. To formally convert to Catholicism, you need a priest sanctified by the Church to perform baptism. Later, one must receive the various sacraments. However, in some streamlined fundamentalist Christian sects, the process of conversion is extraordinarily simple, usually codified in a phrase such as, "I accept Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior, and that He died for my sins and resurrected on the third day," etc. Say the statement sincerely and repent for one's sins, and you are born again in the Christian community. You also receive the grace of Jesus and eternal life. Very simple compared with Catholicism, and perhaps the reason why conservative Christianity is on the rise. In Islam, there is a similar scenario. One needs only to declare the Islamic creed, "There is one God, and Muhammad is his prophet," with deep sincerity, and conversion has transpired. This helps explain why Islam is the fastest-growing religion in the world, expected to significantly surpass Catholicism. Besides promoting simple religious memes, creeds, for conversion, both Christianity and Islam have classic eros and thanatos components, eternal heaven and eternal hell. Each encourage conversions, passively and at times forcibly, and each stress increasing family size. This ranges from Christianity's prohibitions against artificial birth control to Islam's allowance of 4 wives to males if they can support each of them. Blackmore on the success of religion memeplexes. When we look at religions from a means eye view, we can understand why they have been so successful. These religious memes did not set out with the intention to succeed. They were just behaviors, ideas, and stories that were copied from one person to another in the long history of human attempts to understand the world. They were successful because they happened to come together in mutually supportive gangs that included all the right tricks to keep them safely stored in millions of brains, books, and buildings, and repeatedly passed on to more. They evoked strong emotions and strange experiences. They provided myths to answer real questions, and the myths were protected by untestability, threats, and promises. They created and then reduced fear to create compliance, and they used the beauty, truth, and altruism tricks to help their spread. That is why they are still with us, and why millions of people's behavior is routinely controlled by ideas that are either false or completely untestable. The third most popular world religion, Hinduism, differs greatly from both Christianity and Islam, and has several factors that would appear to contravene mimetic theory. First, Hinduism is not a simple memeplex in terms of practice or theology. However, it overcomes that by allowing almost all expressions of religion to be honored. In this way, Hinduism's strength is its acceptance of innumerable gods, gurus, and paths. Thus, Hinduism uses complexity to arrive at a very simple meme. God can be approached by almost any means, provided the devotee is sincere. The number and names of gods will be lost in the translation, and one should not suspect that Hindus will know them all, but not the essential message. God is one, but the paths are many. By allowing variance as a part of their religious landscape, Hinduism minimizes conflict, contradiction, and differences under the rubric that God can manifest in any form he or she desires. Hinduism grows not by its opposition, but by its amazing tolerance. The world's religions that have not garnered large followings are usually due to several factors. Not the least are intrinsic pressures within the group that don't allow for either easier conversions or simplified mimetic understandings. This ranges from Judaism's complex dietary laws to Orthodox Sikhs' Khalsa restrictions to Jainist extremist moral positions. Each of these religions, though relatively successful, will most likely never emerge as large world religions unless they modify their core qualifications. As for new religions, we can predict that those with simpler ideas, easy to remember, will take hold faster and easier than complicated ones, since meme infection more readily occurs if the potential convert is explained the group's ideas in a clear and compacted way. With this in mind, several new religions utilize catchy phrases, publicly chant mantras, or sing religious songs to help this infection along. While religions do not tend to think of themselves as commercials, in a real mimetic sense, that is exactly what they are. And when speaking of simplicity, of course, the name of the guru, teacher, should also be simple, for it is very hard remembering a name that goes on for 15 sentences. Moreover, mimetic distribution is essential for a meme's popularity. That is, a religion must be willing to spread its message, to transmit its core ideas. Religions are somewhat unique here. While all means naturally have a tendency to copy, in the case of religion, especially new ones, it usually overtly encourages, by reward or spiritual bonus points, its transmission via conversion or missionary work. It reminds me of how Amway or Arbonne works. Go to public settings to entice new recruits to sell the products, and the more disciples you pull in, the more you will profit. Most new religions, and many more established religions as well, promote this activity to some degree. although certainly some much more than others. An extreme case of a new religion most of us have probably witnessed doing this are the Hare Krishnas, who fled airports and busy cities passing out literature. In Laguna Beach, my past hometown, they fill the streets on weekends, usually Sundays, spreading their message of Krishna. Going door to door is a method some new religions have utilized as well, though it is a much slower means to spread the meme than is available. A more powerful way to reach a larger audience is through mass media outlets. New religions advertise now on the radio, on the television, and, with an even greater result due to a worldwide audience, on the internet. Utilizing as many languages as possible here, especially in the literature, certainly contributes to greater mimetic distribution. Along this line, it is also important to mention the promotion of religious memes into new cultural environments. To the degree that a religion can introduce novel memes into a culture, it is more likely to be successful provided that such memeplexes fulfill an already pre-existing need in the society, tapping into the market, or more interestingly, create or invent such a desire among the population. A classic example of this would be the meditation group started by Ching Hai, a Taiwanese woman who is a one-time follower of Thakur Singh. Although Shabad yoga thought had become popular in India and in many Western nations, primarily due to books and world tours made by the respective gurus, and the increasing desire for Eastern thought, due to travel openings and improved worldwide communications, it had relatively few successes in China. Why? The answer is amazingly simple. There are practically no Radha Swami or Shabad yoga texts in Chinese or Taiwanese. Thus, the very idea of the meditation practice was unheard of amongst a huge population. Enter Ching Hai, who not only speaks Taiwanese, but widely publishes her work on Shabad yoga in Chinese. The result is not surprising. Thousands of Chinese-speaking people are attracted to her as their guru. Furthermore, worth noting are those new religions that piggyback on already existing memeplexes in order to infect their host more easily. For instance, many Eastern religions in America, being new to this culture, make parallels to Christianity and even incorporate its theology into the meme of the new religion. While novel is sometimes exciting, too foreign can be a turnoff. Hence, bring in some familiarity into the equation, that is, dovetail with pre-existing memeplexes, and the probability is greater success. Self-Realization Fellowship, started by a Hindu yogi named Yogananda in the 1920s, serves as a prime example, as it displays pictures of Jesus in the religious centers. No doubt many adherents are won over to its somewhat eclectic and ecumenical message. Blackmore on the truth and falsity of religion. I do not mean to imply from all that I have said that there are no true ideas anywhere in religion. The mimetic mechanisms I have described would allow religions to flourish that were based on complete falsehoods and nothing else. But there may be true ideas embedded in them as well. Just as some alternative therapies thrive by including a few treatments that work, so religions may include valid insights as well as misleading myths. In the concluding section, Ken Wilber's analysis of religion explains how both cultural disintegration and mimetic competition are structurally related to the evolution of human consciousness. Hence, genes, memes, and culture are in a constant interplay, and each of them cannot be understood in totality via isolation. Genes, memes, and new religions. Susan Blackmore's mimetic theory is indeed very powerful to understand human culture, especially new religions. However, its analysis is strictly horizontal, failing to take into consideration the progressive stages of human thought. Yes, memes explain how ideas infiltrate our minds and our society, but what is needed is an explanation of how certain memes resonate with particular environments, that is, particular stages of evolutionary thought, better than others. Instead of placing all religious memes into the same linear category, a more helpful method would be to differentiate the various types of memes as they correspond to different psycho-social, emotional levels of humans. Some religious memeplexes are clearly different, not just in content, but in type. Certainly, most of us recognize the difference between a meditating Zen master and a Jim Jones-type leader. Thus, being able to adjudicate which stage a new religion fits offers a more accurate assessment of what they are all about. Ken Wilber's work on the spectrum of consciousness adds this necessary ingredient. He argues that just as there has been an evolution to the human body over millions of years, including the brain, so too has human consciousness evolved. This evolution of human consciousness can also be viewed as the evolution of human ideas, which are intimately dependent upon the particular structure of psychosocial awareness that is in evidence. The world does not so much change as does our mimetic interaction with it. Hence, memes are structurally aligned to a particular pathway of growth, and Wilber suggests that paying attention to a structure of consciousness via Piaget's stages of psychogenetic growth will help us to better understand why certain memes are found appealing at different times and for different peoples. A classic example of how memes relate to stages of consciousness would be buying Christmas presents for one's family. The gifts are, invariably, age-dependent. A 4-year-old child's awareness of the world and wants or needs are dramatically different than a teenager's. The same with buying books for students in grammar school, high school, and college. Each book or present contains ideas, but each are suited to the particular age of the recipient. To neglect the hierarchy of consciousness is to neglect the very instrumental guideline to mimetic reproduction. Therefore, Wilber suggests that only certain memes can be replicated due to the stage of consciousness that is presently engaged. Memes about sexual reproduction, for instance, will be much more popular with those who have undergone puberty than those who have not. The reason why is not due simply to mimetic mimicry, but also because of hormones. One, then, cannot divorce genetics and the growth of human consciousness from mimetics. They go hand in hand in some ways, only to depart significantly at other turns. Wilber's hierarchy of consciousness helps us to ladder memes according to human growth cycles, both individually and socially. Consequently, not only will we be better able to predict why certain ideas get passed along a culture, we will be better suited to understand why some ideas never take hold among certain nations or tribes. The main stages of human consciousness that Wilber delineates are pre-rational, magic, mythic, rational, and transrational. With each stage, corresponding memes would find their home. Memes which promote group thinking, a magical worldview, blind acceptance, non-scientific approaches to the world, and, correlated to that, a lack of critical thought, fit in the first category. Memes which allow for individuality, skepticism, a scientific worldview, and perspectivism, being able to step into another's shoes, or meme, as it were, fit in the second level. And memes that incorporate the former, but add also an even broader worldview, one that may coordinate and integrate different perspectives and may draw upon mysticism, are placed in the final category. Unfortunately, because pre-rational memes and transrational ones are both non-rational, sometimes the distinctions between them become blurred. In this case, transrational groups are wrongly categorized as infantile and magical mythic ones as transcendent. Wilber on the pre-trans fallacy. The essence of the pre-trans fallacy is itself simple. Since both pre-rational states and transrational states are, in their own ways, non-rational, they appear similar or even identical to the untutored eye. And once pre and trans are confused, then one of two fallacies occurs. All higher and transrational stages are reduced to lower and pre-rational states. Genuine mystical or contemplative experiences, for example, are seen as a regression or throwback to infantile states of narcissism, oceanic idolism, indissociation, and even primitive autism. On the other hand, if one is sympathetic with higher or mystical states, but one still confuses pre and trans, then one will elevate all pre-rational states to some sort of transrational glory. Wilber further contends that these stages of human evolution are witnessed not only ontogenetically, but also phylogenetically. In other words, there is a parallel between an individual's evolution, from pre-operational to formal operational, and the evolution of human cultures. We can, in a way, witness the classic evolutionary stages of thought that have taken millions of years to go through in one individual's life, assuming this individual reaches the formal operational level and perhaps beyond. The transrational stage of human consciousness, claims Wilber, is only tapped by a few, and so still a rarity at this time. Wilber on the transrational experience. But what could an actual transpersonal experience really mean? It's not nearly as mysterious as it sounds. The observer in you, the witness in you, transcends the isolated person in you and opens instead, from within or from behind, as Emerson said, onto a vast expanse of awareness no longer obsessed with the individual body-mind, no longer respecter or abuser of persons, no longer fascinated by the passing joys and set-apart sorrows of the lonely self, but standing in silence as an opening or clearing through which light shines. What does all of this say in regard to evaluating religion? Quite simply, it suggests that certain religious memes may appeal to certain brain states. Pre-rational groups, such as of tribal origin, would identify with particular memes and not others. God or gods most likely would not be described abstractly, but very concretely, perhaps in anthropomorphic terms. Magical thought would also be a significant element here. The way children, yet to develop their operational or formal operational cognitive skills, see God and the world, serves as an example of this state of consciousness. Similarly, religious memes that allow for a cause and effect view of the world, which involve a more abstract view of the divine, and which promote scientific thinking, would find their place in the minds of those at the rational level. And, continuing this line of argument, transrational memes would appeal to those who have mastered the former level and can now open their minds to an even deeper understanding of reality, whatever that be. Wilber argues that at this stage, one can witness the interconnectedness of the world and of ideas. One can see the larger scheme of things. And if one has not yet attained Maslow's self-actualized state of consciousness, one can envision and work towards it. Wilber is not only saying that the religious memes match our brain states, but also that our religious ideas evolve as our brain states evolve. It makes sense, then, that at 5 I believed in Santa Claus, but at 10 I no longer did. At 12 I believed in Adam and Eve and creationism, but at 18 I was an evolutionist. Ironically, my Catholic religion also supported evolution, yet I was unaware of it until much later. At 20 I believed in an anthropomorphic God, which transformed into a non-theistic version by 25, and so on. Particular memes resonated with the particular brain state I was in, and the same is true, contends Wilber, for human cultures. Now, there's a big caveat here. It may sound like Wilber is judging religions. When he says a specific religion fits more in the pre-rational category, is he not criticizing it? Certainly, there may be a problem here if his objective was to purport ontological truth, but Wilber is not. Rather, his aim is to recognize psychological patterns of human thought following the lead of Piaget, who argued that our concepts of God evolve with our cognitive states. One at the operational level will see God very differently than one at the former operational level. Is one stage better than the other? Well, perhaps it is best to say that each stage serves as a foundation for the next, and so plays an invaluable role in our cognitive development. We should not sneer at the pre-rational level, since it is necessary to lead us to the rational level. Likewise, we should not ridicule the rational stage, since it is a transitional bridge to the transrational. The transrational level, in Wilber's mind, is the direction we all seem to be eventually heading toward. Some individuals and religious groups, serving as exemplary models, may have already accessed it. This stage may be a higher level of cognitive development, but the adjective better is really not necessary. Overall, we can see that religious memes come in different types and correspond with different stages of consciousness. Recognizing the interplay between memetics and genetics certainly helps scholars to better understand how to adjudicate new religions, and may in the long run help us to predict which new religions, now in the competitive spiritual marketplace, will survive in the future. As expected, transrational memes springing up in a tribal culture may not replicate well, and mythic memes in a strongly scientific community may die out. Thus, matching the meme to the proper psycho-social emotional stage of the potential buyers will help to ensure its survival and possible success.